So I wanted to do a video about this topic, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, because it's something that I don't think gets enough attention. I don't think that it gets the attention that it deserves in the media. And it really only comes up once a year, right around this time. You see Republicans trying to force a vote on it. So I don't think it really gets enough attention because when those votes ultimately fail, because the Democrats don't want this bill, it ends up just getting put on a shelf and forgotten about for another year. And I don't want that to happen. So last week, both chambers of Congress, the House and the Senate, voted on the the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. And what this bill does is actually remarkably simple. If a baby is born alive from a botched abortion procedure, then doctors and nurses in attendance there during the procedure would be obligated to provide life-saving and resuscitative care to that baby. It's a simple premise. When a baby's born alive, they deserve medical care, and it should be a crime to either kill the baby or neglect it to the point of death. It shouldn't be controversial, but Democrats view this as an abortion issue. If you notice, this really doesn't have anything to do with abortion. This has to do with babies that are born alive. By all definitions, even from the most radical pro-abortion side of the argument, by all definitions, when a baby is born alive, they are a baby. There's a human being. It's a U.S. citizen, and you can't just kill the baby. That's called infanticide. It's called murder. But what we're seeing Democrats do now is protecting what's starting to be called post-birth abortion. Now, we saw this last year with the governor in Virginia saying that if a baby was born alive and the mother didn't want to keep the baby after a botched abortion, that it would be up to the mother and the doctor to talk about what the options are moving forward. Now, that was a horrible, horrible clip. And obviously, he denies it, but obviously that showed that one of the options on the table was kill the baby. Just to be clear, regardless of what you believe about a woman's right to choose, regardless of your pro-life or pro-choice position, that choice goes away when the baby's born. You cannot argue my body, my choice when the baby is outside the womb, living, breathing, kicking, crying. You can't argue it. That's murder. When you kill a newborn, it's infanticide, it's murder. But that's what Democrats are kind of arguing here. This bill would have protected any baby that's born alive. Now, some people say that those protections are already in place. Maybe Kermit Gosnell was arrested and he went to prison, and investigators saw in his operating rooms that he was killing babies with scissors, putting them in freezers to kill them from exposure. Really gruesome stuff. So just because the law should protect babies born alive from botched abortion procedures doesn't mean that it adequately does, and doesn't mean that it's redundant or unnecessary to provide them extra protections. So when you hear a Democrat talk about this bill and condemn it, it's really hard to stomach that, because what they're arguing is that not only does Roe versus Wade, this is their position, not mine. They say that not only does Roe versus Wade protect a woman's right to have an abortion, but they seem to believe that there should be some window of time after a baby is born where the baby can still be killed without consequence, right? The act of saying, I don't want the baby, let's have an abortion, but the baby survives. Democrats are arguing that mothers should be allowed to have a do-over, that they should have a second chance. That's crazy. And what we saw is when this bill came up for a vote in the House of Representatives, 220 Democrats voted against it. Now, I want to give the three Democrats that voted with Republicans for this amendment, I want to give them credit. It's Reps Peterson from Minnesota, McAdams from Utah, and Lipinski from Illinois. Now, they get credit on this. They should be voting against their colleagues on a lot more issues, but they get credit in the House for voting for this common sense amendment, because that's what this was. This was presented as an amendment onto, I think it was a vaping bill. So in order for an amendment, in case you don't know, in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, in order for an amendment to be added to a bill, it has to be ruled germane, which all that means is that it has to be on a similar enough topic as the bill that it would be added to. You can't just come out of left field with something that has nothing to do with the bill you're talking about and add it as an amendment. It has to be germane. So this amendment was added to that health-related vaping bill that would have included the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act into that legislation. And those three Democrats voted for it, but the rest of the Democratic Party voted against it. In the Senate, There was another vote on the bill, and again, 3 Democrats voted with the Republicans. You had Doug Jones in Georgia, you had Manchin in West Virginia, and you had Casey in Pennsylvania. They were the 3 that voted with Republicans to support this bill. So obviously, they get the props because they looked at this and said, oh my goodness, of course we can't allow babies born alive to be murdered. But their colleagues, the Democrats, look at this as restricting abortion rights. How is it restricting abortion rights, saying that if a baby survives an abortion procedure, you have to help the baby survive? You have to help the baby live. You have to provide resuscitative care. Listen, I tell this story a lot when I write articles with Conservative Daily. I tell the story a lot. When my son was born, it was one of the happiest moments of my life. But it was also kind of the most terrifying because he didn't cry immediately. The nurses had to bring him over under the heat lamp, and they were rubbing him down and patting his back and trying to clear his airways to let him breathe for the first time, let him cry out. And it felt like an eternity, right? It felt like this deafening silence that what's going on? Why isn't he crying? But it only was a couple seconds, but it felt like an eternity before I heard that first cry, and heard him take that breath. What Democrats are talking about is that when a baby is born alive from a botched abortion procedure and they have fluid in their lungs or in their mouth and they can't breathe, instead of putting them under the heat lamp and trying to clear the obstruction in their airways, what Democrats are talking about is that doctors and nurses, if the mother agrees, should be allowed to leave the baby there to suffocate and to die from exposure. It's really gross. It's really, really gross. And it gets emotional thinking about it because I've seen firsthand how vulnerable a newborn is and how much help they need just to be able to get into the world breathing their first breath. You see how vulnerable they are, and you can't imagine someone who would look at that and say, oh yeah, let's just leave them over there. Let nature work its way out. If they live, they live. If they die, they die. It's heartless. It really is heartless. So I applaud the Democrats that voted for this bill, this amendment. I applaud the Republicans that forced the vote, which that's no easy task in Nancy Pelosi's House. It's no easy task to force a vote on an amendment or a bill of this magnitude. And I applaud the Republicans in the Senate who did the same, who forced this vote. It was Ben Sasse of Nebraska. What I don't like is the fact that this bill will now go and collect dust until next year around the March for Life when the bill's supporters start ginning up support for the bill, move it down the line for another vote. Right? That's not good enough. It's not good enough to just vote on this once a year. These babies, they need help. They need to be protected. It's it's a non-zero number of babies who are born alive from botched abortion procedures and left to die. It's a non-zero number. We don't know how many of them there are. I've seen Canadian numbers because they keep track of this data a little bit better. I've seen Canadian numbers that indicate that if you take the same percentages and apply it to the American statistics, it would suggest that the number's in the hundreds, right? But it's a non-zero number. And what we hear from Democrats time after time is that, I mean, when we hear it with gun control, if it can save just one life, then it's worth it, right? If it can save just one life, then it's worth it. But here we are with a bill that all it says is when a baby's born alive, you can't kill the baby. You can't neglect the baby. You have an obligation to provide medical care for the baby. You have something so common sense, and you have one party that doesn't want to touch it. And the Republican Party that does want to touch it will vote on it and then put it aside for another year. It's wrong. So we're trying to raise awareness to this and make sure that the people who, like me, agree that this is barbaric keep pushing for it, keep fighting for it. It was a big enough deal that the Senate voted on this a second time. Usually, legislation introduced and that gets a vote in the Senate is not brought back up for a second vote. It almost never happens. In very exceptional circumstances, will bills be brought up for a second vote. But what we saw is when it came up for the second vote, you had Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, who had previously opposed the measure, flip sides and vote with the conservatives on this. So we're seeing a movement. We're not only are we seeing Democrats, albeit six of them, coming on board and voting for this, but we're also seeing that the moderate Republicans who had opposed this measure in the last year, we were able to flip them too. So we have momentum behind us. But we can't let this go another year. We have to keep pressuring this. So when we put out campaigns, join our campaigns, help us pressure Congress, and on your own, write letters, call your congressmen and senators, and pressure them to protect the unborn. It's a famous quote, and it's from Gandhi, and I love it. And it's the idea that a society is measured by how it treats the most vulnerable among them. And there is no population, and anyone who has been there and seen their child come into the world or witnessed another baby being born, we all know that there is no more vulnerable population in this country than a newborn baby immediately after being born. There's no more vulnerable group of people in the United States. That's it. And to think that there are people out there that believe these babies should be left to fend for themselves, and if the mother doesn't want them, she should be able to tell doctors or nurses not to help them, not to keep the baby alive. No, not in my America, not in my country. So if you agree with me, please join our campaigns as they come out and pressure your congressmen and senators to keep fighting and keep advancing this bill forward, because we've made a lot of progress, but we can't stop now. So if you like this kind of content, please like it, click the thumbs up, click the subscribe button and the bell to receive notifications, and leave a comment. Let us know what you think, because we want to grow this channel, and the only way we can do that is with your help.